We are now recording.
Hello again to everybody, and welcome to another edition of Consciousness Hour. This show I've been looking forward to for some time. The reason will become apparent very, very soon. But I'll just give you a little bit of background, really. Many of you will be aware that a central concept of my work, both in my book, Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die, and also my book, The Daemon, A Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self, I have one specific theme in this book, in these books. And this theme is the idea that we are not singular creatures, but we are dual creatures, that effectively there are two elements to our psychology, two elements to our personality. There's the everyday self that exists in consensual reality, the everyday self that lives and exists in linear time and perceives the universe in a way that takes a lot of the world out of the world. In other words, we perceive the universe through our senses, and our senses sometimes act as filters which don't allow us to perceive the universe as it really is. This is the being called the Eidolon. Now, I would suspect that the vast majority of people listening to this discussion will be Eidolons. However, there is also another part of ourselves which I call the Daemon. And the Daemon is the higher self. The Daemon is the part of us that exists outside of time. The Daemon effectively is analogous in many, many ways to a person playing a an RPG computer game. And the idea is that the Eidolon is the being on the screen that is living life normally, and the game player is the Daemon. The game player is the person that actually views the life as a singular entity and a singular time scale. Now, effectively, the reason I'm so fascinated by tonight's guest, or today's guest, or whichever way you're listening to it at the moment is that this gentleman, in fact, proves virtually every single thing that I wrote about in my first two books. And what is interesting is that I didn't know anything about this guy's work, this guy's experiences at all when I wrote my first book. And I think I'm right in saying that he contacted me after coming across some of my work. The gentleman in question is a guy called Myron Dyal, Myron Dyal. Now, what is fascinating about Myron is that he experiences temporal lobe epilepsy. Now, many of you will know that my next book is going to be featuring temporal lobe epilepsy as a phenomenon. And I argue that temporal lobe epilepsy actually opens the doors of perception and allows certain individuals to perceive the reality behind the reality. But not only that, but the doors of communication are opened between the lower self, the Eidolon, and the higher self, the Daemon. And effectively, this is to do with certain neurotransmitters in the brain and various other things. But this is fascinating, and it's an area that there is so much work yet to be done on. Now, without further ado, I'd like now to introduce you to my present guest, which is a gentleman called Myron Dyal. Myron, welcome so much to the Consciousness Hour show.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Okay, what I'd like to... Go on.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what I'd like to do now is to discuss a little bit about how we made contact, and in fact, a little bit about you and your background. Now, let's do this first. Let's actually talk about Myron Dyal, the boy that nobody wanted, the gentleman that had and has had a series of amazing experiences. So for about a minute or two, maybe a little bit longer, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you've ended up doing the amazing things that you do?
Okay. Back when I was very young, when I was 4 years old, I went into a coma, and this is like 1947, so they didn't have very sophisticated diagnostic material or ways of determining what causes what in the brain back then. Anyway, I was in this coma for, some people say, 2 months to 2 weeks. I mean, I couldn't get the records because most of the records from Children's Hospital in Los Angeles were destroyed. And I do know from my parents and from my brother and others that I was in this coma for quite some time. And I had one personality before I went into the coma. When I came out of the coma, my mind was completely erased. I didn't know my parents. I didn't know anything. The only thing that penetrated the coma was my music. I could still play the piano. I could play before I went into the coma, and I could play when I came out of it. But every single thing else made me a stranger in a strange land. So I didn't, these people that I called, that people said, well, these are your parents, I didn't recognize them as anything except strangers. And simultaneously with them not being recognized by me, a friend appeared that I called a friend for many, many years that I now call Charon, which is my name, as you would call him. And Charon has been with me ever since I was 4 years old, and has taken me through many, many, many journeys. My parents were fundamentalist Christians, and they thought I was demon possessed, and not Damien possessed, but demon possessed. And because of that, they used to beat me pretty severely. Today, they could never get away with what they got away with back then. So every time I had a seizure, actually a grand mal seizure, they would beat me. And so I still have the physical scars, never mind the emotional scars. And Charon would take me places while they were doing their acts of violence. And we would go to these wondrous dimensions that were just beyond my little brain's comprehension. And in fact, I wrote about it in a book that I have on my website that I'm rewriting and published probably in 2016 on. But anyway, so I grew up in a very strict religious background, and even in church, I would sit, and when I was 8 years old, I would sit in church, and I would see, instead of seeing the speaker, ministering, I would see hallucination of pigs being slaughtered by priests and them drinking their blood. Now, an 8-year-old doesn't know about the history of these kinds of rituals. And it wasn't until many, many years later that I was exploring shamanism and ancient culture that I found that these kind of things occurred on a regular basis, that slaughtering people and slaughtering animals and drinking their blood was a common ritual among many, many, many peoples. So, like Jung would say, there was an invasion from the collective unconscious, and this collective unconscious interaction created a kind of bond between me and Charon and these journeys. And I spent more time. I have more memory of those experiences than I have of my actual childhood. My childhood is, as an external event, is vague, and I remember very little of it. Even the abuse that I experienced, I didn't really recall it until I started writing this book that I have online on my website. And when I started writing the book, it all started coming back to me. Well, anyway, I could never marry. I could never have a Heros Gamos, a sacred marriage between what I saw and what I was being taught in church. I couldn't marry the two. They were diametrically opposed. I remember one time, I think it was Ramakrishna said that if you have an experience, you go with your experience. In Western culture, if you have an experience and it goes against the Bible, then you go with the Bible. Well, in Hinduism, if you have an experience, you go with your experience. And I couldn't deny my experiences. They were so powerful and so overwhelming psychologically and physically and every other way, spiritually, that I just kind of went with it. So I would spend a great deal of time alone. It's kind of like my parents were afraid of me. They considered me a threat to them. It was a very odd relationship that we had. They would let me go walk in the hills, go wherever I wanted to go, do whatever I wanted to do, and they would not do anything about it. So that's what I did. Caroline and I would go on long walks And in these walks, things would disappear. The road would change, the bushes would change, the landscape would morph into something else. And I would spend all day, and it would seem like 5 minutes. Well, many years later, I was diagnosed as TLE, temporal lobe epilepsy. And when I was young, I didn't realize that I had epilepsy. I just thought I was demon possessed. That was the story that was given to me from my parents. When I got older, I started to read. I had an MD doctor who actually was from Britain and had 3 PhDs. He was an MD, but he had a PhD in music, and he had a PhD in philosophy, all from Cambridge. And he gave me a book from Dr. Hume called An Answer to Job. And it was the first step to another relationship with my unconscious. I read this book, The Answer to Job, and in that book, Hume postulates that Job was individuating while the story goes on. And I thought, a person individuates, a person grows in consciousness. And then, of course, that affects people around them, and then they in turn grow in consciousness. And it changed me. I mean, I must tell you, when I read that, I read everything I could get my hands on that Jung ever wrote. So I read his whole Gesellschaft of information, especially the alchemical books, which are very complicated. But the pictures in the alchemical book were so familiar to me. It was like that I had seen them before. I had actually drawn those pictures myself. And so I never felt more at home than I did in the alchemical studies books. But then I also noticed that my experiences were uniquely mine, and they had nothing to do with any preconceived or pre-experienced messages from the unconscious. And I went on my way after that, studying everything I could get my hands on, comparative religion, everything to do with societies and how they're built. And I left my parents and joined the military and got through the military even though I had epilepsy. I even had seizures in basic training. Nobody knew I didn't know that that's what they were, because it would just, the landscape would change. And I got through that. And then I went to school and got a degree in music composition, which I got at Long Beach State. And I continued my studies in the areas of the unconscious through mentors that I met from time to time. I had a run-in with Baba Muktananda. I don't know if you know who that is, but Baba came to me in a blue light, in a vision, and I spent a lot of time learning and studying with him, and in a metaphysical sense, in a different area, different plane of existence. And one day while I was on the mountain, which is close to where I live here, he came to me and he said, our time is done, and I have to leave you now. And within a few hours, I got a phone call that he had passed away in India. And so I've had these kind of experiences most of my life. Now, whether they're all connected with TLE or not, I doubt it. I think that a great many of them are. My epilepsy resides in the left hippocampus that's damaged, and it affects my visual memory. So while we're talking, I could lose what we're looking at, the screen, you, but I would still know what was going on one plane of existence while being in another plane of existence. So I could be in a dual reality and have been in many, many instances been in dual realities at the same time. Because it's my contention that, kind of like string theory, the brain has many, 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 many levels. And that since we use very little of it, mystics or people that are mystically inclined or chosen in the sense of people with TLE, I think that if they decide that they want to use it as a bridge to their inner selves, that it's an automatic stepping stone to that experience. There are many, many people with TLE who do not do that. They stay very safe. Some of them are Christians, some of them have no religion at all. And it also depends on what culture you're in. Thousands of years ago, epileptics were stoned to death. So it's not like this is anything new. Now, in other cultures, people with TLE are shamans. Almost all shamans are born, not made. So in my case, my shamanistic qualities come the same way that all shamans do, and that is that they come as a gift. And in my mind, even though these experiences have cost me a great deal in the external world, on the internal side, it has made my life more complete and given me insights into things that I never would have experienced had I not been given this gift of TLE. Now, when I say that to epilepsy groups, I get a lot of mixed reactions because most people who have TLE are not functional. They don't function at a high level. I think that's partly cultural, and I think it's also partly because the events can be very, 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 very bad, or they can be moderate, or they can be so severe that you can't function. Especially if you have drop seizures, or what they used to call grand mal seizures, which now they call tonic-clonic seizures. If you have those, and I did have those when I was a child, I used to hide my seizures from my parents because every time I would have one, they would abuse me. So I would go into a closet, have the seizure. Sometimes I would wet myself and things, and then I would change clothes or burn it or throw it away, and then come back out and act as if nothing had happened. And so you get a very strange relationship with reality when you have to hide yourself. I think that if you were gay or an alcoholic or a drug addict or something, or anything that you had to hide from culture, the culture you live in, or from the people that are around you, it gives you a kind of paranoia about talking about it. So I didn't talk about this at all until I was about 60 years old. Before that, I did all this by myself, alone. 7,000 drawings, the sculptures, the art, all of it was done, and I never intended to show it to anyone because my experiences were more important to me than any kind of recognition. I wasn't doing it to be an artist. I was doing it because these experiences were so luminous and so such a high experiential quality that I had to make a record of them. I had to keep a record so I could go back and look at the drawing. And the second that I look at it, I am back where I was the minute I saw it the first time. So there's no time differentiation between what happened when I had the event and today. It's like time doesn't exist under those experiential situations. And so I have spent enormous amounts of time alone, climbing in the mountains, walking in the mountains, because there's mountains up here in Chatsworth where I live, and there used to be an old ocean, 400 million years ago. This was an ocean. So what's left here is sandstone mountains that are luminous and just so powerful that the Chumash Indians who lived here used this whole area as its point of departure, interestingly enough, to go to another level. And there's a place called Stony Point, which is just up the street here. And they used to go to the top of that mountain, and as I understand it, I have done some research on this, that's where they would leave and go into another dimension on the top of that mountain. And there's still evidence of their existence all over this area. There's some burial grounds here and things like that. Interestingly enough, when I used to go up there before I ever knew anything about them, again, I would see them walking around. I would see their villages. And I thought, why am I seeing, I asked Karen, why am I seeing villages? Why would I be seeing an Indian village? What has that got to do with me in the 20th century? I mean, what is the point? And Karen made it very clear that these peoples were here for thousands of years before any white man ever walked this area. So there is I do believe that there is a channel that you can go into if your prejudices against consciousness are assuaged, and that channel can take you from one level to the next. Now, I don't always remember what occurred at any particular level. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It really depends on what the experience is. The record of it, the keeping of the record of it has many dimensions. But one of the dimensions is that I started out by just doing stick drawings because I wasn't an artist. I was a musician. And my brother was the artist, and he went to art school, and I went to music school. And I remember one time talking to my composition teacher, and he was saying, "Where do you get your musical ideas?" And I told him, I said, "Well, I see visions, and from those visions, I make music." And he said, "If you see visions, why don't you go over to the art school? What are you doing over here in the music school?" And I thought, well, I don't know. That's all I knew. I played the violin, and I played the viola, and I played the piano. And I played in many, many orchestras when I was young, 10 orchestras here, and made a pretty good living at it for a while. But I was injured in the military, and I could really never follow that career. My left arm was injured, and it got arthritic, and so consequently I had to stop playing professionally. It's interesting enough. This is very, 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 very interesting. Christ says, if a man loses his life, he'll find it. If he finds his life, he'll lose it. And I lost my life. I was a musician. I've been a musician since I was a child, even before the coma. And that was taken away from me. And so there was some grief and anger and resentment about losing that. And so I started writing in little tiny journals about this big, just writing my experiences down. And from there, I started doing little stick drawings of those experiences. And from there, I did better drawings. And over a period of years, my skill got better and better and better and better. And part of it is because I already see these things in reality. So I'm not making them up. I'm not designing the canvas. I'm already seeing them from my unconscious experiences. So it's just a matter of me putting it on canvas or on the page in my journals is where it all started. Georgia O'Keeffe said that a man's skill will rise to his vision. And that is actually what's happened to me. My visions have created this whole new art form for me, which has been much more fulfilling than music ever was. Because even though music is a wonderful, beautiful, and emotional experience, it doesn't hold an image. There is no image in music. If I write a lyric and you're connected to the lyric, but the sound, if I write a piece called La Mer, the sea, and I say it's the sea and you hear it, it doesn't mean that you hear the ocean. You might hear the wind, you might hear all kinds of things. If I draw a picture of it, you go, oh, well, that's the ocean. The differences between those two things really helped me focus my experiences into a cognitive, experiential way of solidifying what needed to be done in order for me to move from one thing to the next. Life to me is an experiential, educational experience. And if you're not moving from here to there, then you're not moving at all. Now, Charon, my spirit guide, never judges me at all, ever. So if I do something really stupid, or I'm lazy, or whatever, there's never any judgment from Charon about that at all. Charon, I come apologetic and say, I know I should be doing this and I should be doing that. And all Charon would say is, can we move on? Let's go to the next thing. I mean, Charon was nothing but pure love, pure experience, pure acceptance, and nothing judgmental. Nothing. No matter what I did. Because that's what love is. Love is not judgmental. And so consequently, I started doing drawings to make a record. And then later on, I have visions that are in color. And the color visions are brilliant color. So my paintings are what I see when I have the vision. In other words, I'm not mixing the colors to look a certain way. This is the way the colors look in my brain. So I'm just reproducing the colors that I actually see. A lot of artists who went to school and studied art, which I never did, ask me about my colors a lot. And I tell them the same story I just told you, that the colors come to me already done, already on the canvas. So I just have to paint by number and just put it down. Drawings and paintings are fine, but they're not three-dimensional. And my experiences are all three-dimensional. So I started doing sculpture. It was very primitive the first time I started doing sculpture. It was pretty awful, actually. But I felt so good about it because I could visualize it, I could dance it. It was experiential. It was always present. There's a sculpture right behind me, right here, that looks like death. But of course, death is an ego problem. It isn't a spiritual problem. And death is just transformation. And so she's standing there, and she's continually standing there, and she's in three dimensions. So I can walk around her, I can interact with her, and we can sort of do a shamanistic dance. So I started doing sculpture probably back in about 1980, something like that, 1981. And then sculpture became one of the main focal points of my creative experiences because of the satisfaction of just being able to see that other world in three dimensions and continually experience it in three dimensions rather than seeing it flat in two dimensions, trying to make it with perspective into three dimensions. It occurred to me that shamans have been doing that forever. I was in Vancouver, and I was at the University of Vancouver. My wife and I went up there for vacation. And in the University of Vancouver, they have a whole museum of shamanistic carvings. Some of them are 18 feet high, some are 20 feet high. Some of them are boats with creatures in them. I mean, they're just magic. They're just really magic. And so we went into the main room of the museum. I was so affected. All I could do was sit down and weep because what I saw was what I do. And I realized that man has been doing this since time immemorial. I mean, it's just part of the need to get it out, to have it be born, and to be able to experience it, to take this boat, the Egyptian boats of sailing across from one life to another. So it was a shocking realization when I sat in a sweat lodge here in Nevada with some American Indians back in the 60s, and we took peyote. I shouldn't say I'm saying this, but we took some peyote, but this was actually government sponsored because a friend of mine was an attorney, and he won the case for Indians to use peyote on the reservation as part of their religious experiences. So they put up a sweat lodge. It's like 3 days. You start by fasting because you're going to get real sick when you take the peyote. And to make a long story short, after about 2 days of taking peyote and stuff, what I saw was nothing I didn't see already. And so I went to the shaman who put up the experience. I told him, he said, well, so what did you experience? And I said, well, I didn't see anything that I don't see anyway. And he said, oh, so then you're a shaman. And that was kind of the first time anyone had ever said that word to me and used it directly to me and saying, maybe you have shamanistic characteristics. I'd already read, of course, Castaneda's books and all that kind of stuff, which I didn't quite believe, but I was fascinated by a lot of his writings, a lot of his experiences. And so from that strange beginning of childhood to some Indian experiences, to my own personal experiences, and from going from music to art, those transitions took like decades to get through. Americans or Western people by design want everything yesterday. They want this to go quickly. They want to, Baba used to complain that people want to be enlightened, but they didn't want to do the work. And they didn't want to spend time alone and isolated. And people would ask me, years later after I came out and I got reviews in the newspaper about my art, my colleagues would say, when do you do all this art? I mean, how is it possible that you could do, over 10,000 works? How is that possible? And still have a regular job? And because I was vice president of a corporation for more than 30 years. And I told them, I said, look, you guys are on vacation. I am working on my art. When you're sleeping, I'm awake. And I'm dreaming in real time. But I'm not dreaming from sleep. I'm dreaming from my own experiences. And when I awaken from those experiences, I'm not tired. I'm invigorated. And of course, I've been through all the diagnostic stuff of bipolar and this and that and everything else. I don't think I'm bipolar at all. As a matter of fact, to go back a little bit, when I was married to my first wife's mother thought that I was schizophrenic, because she was studying psychiatry with a person. So they set up this mock marriage counseling thing between me and a psychiatrist. And this is when I was about 39 or 40 years old, something like that. And maybe even older than that. Anyway, so I went to him under the guise that this was going to be marriage counseling. And then after about 3 or 4 meetings, he said to me, "I'm going to meet with Myron. You go and meet with my colleague." And he explained to me what they were doing. This was a setup. So they were trying to diagnose whether I was schizophrenic or not. And it had nothing to do with marriage counseling. Well, of course, I was outraged and mad as hell about it. But then he said, "Let me tell you right now, you don't have a single symptom of schizophrenia. Nothing. You're not schizophrenic. Did you ever think that you had epilepsy?" And that was the first time anyone had mentioned that word to me since my childhood. And I said, "Well, no, actually, I don't even know what epilepsy is, except I've heard the word, of course." And then so we went from there. And so he was another mentor of mine. He gave me a breakthrough to another dimension of understanding of how you can get from A to B, C to D, And so he and I took a little journey, and he also turned me on to a lot of the alchemical stuff, and we discussed it at length. And he referred me to a neurologist, and that's when neurology got involved in my experiences. They did some tests and they found nothing. They didn't find anything, any scars. They didn't find any evidence I had epilepsy, except what I told them. When I described my experiences, they said, "Well, that could be seizures, that could be bipolar, that could be your imagination, that could be a lot of things." They sort of dismissed it. So we let it go. And then when I was 15, I went to, I had some very profound experiences where I was out for 8 hours. So I was in a different dimension, in a different world for 8 hours. And in those 8 hours, I went on these very long journeys into other areas of experience. And when I came out of that experience, I could not remember exactly what had happened, but I could remember it like you remember a dream. You might remember part of it, but you're not going to remember all of it. I remembered it enough that I could make a record of it. So I went to UCLA and I saw the #1 guy down there. Because by this time I had a big shot and I had some connections. And they finally, with the MRI machine, they found the focal, as they call it, of my epilepsy. And that MRI I sent you was the corroboration of that diagnosis. And then they started putting me on meds and all kinds of things like that. And I had another decade or so to work. So I still had my seizures were getting more and more and more pronounced. And I was spending much more time in the other dimensions than I was working. So my career was winding down, and this new career, which was art and shamanism, was being born. So I was, again, making a transition. my first transition was from music to visual art. The second transition was from the world and all of its attractions, because there are many attractions to being extroverted. You know, there's money, there's vacations, there's all kinds of things. During all of those times, I was always being pulled to this other part of me that was much more luminous and much more powerful. So by the time I reached 60, that last decade, I made the total transition to being a full-time artist and being a full-time shaman. Karen came to me and said, okay, all this art that you don't want to show, well, we're going to show it. And I was freaked out because we live in a very, very hung-up society here. I don't know what it's like in England, but I can tell you, in the United States, people are remedial. I mean, my God, you know, you see things and they're so freaked out that it's just a joke. What's really interesting is when people come, repair people come to fix my house, if they're Hispanic and they come here, they love it. I mean, it's like Day of the Dead. It's like being at home. And boss come here, white people that are just middle-class white people come here. They get all freaked out because they don't know what these images are, what they mean, or whether they're from the devil or not. I mean, it's really kind of cute the way they react. But I'm never sure how anybody's going to react. I had a guy come here. He was like a hippie. He had long hair, and he was supposed to fix the plumbing. He freaked out. He actually turned around and left. He wouldn't even stay in this house because the house is filled with art from in every single room. And I know I live here, but it's my studio as well. Well, anyway, so I made the transition to artist by Myron saying, "Okay, we're gonna get out. We're gonna go out." So I've been with some friends that are in the art world for many, many, many years, and they did not know that I did art. They just thought I was a musician, and because I played piano for them and stuff. And they came over one day and walked in. They're big in the art world, and they looked around and they said, "Well, where did all this art come from? Who did it? Who made this art?" I said, "Well, I kind of did this. I was kind of embarrassed about it." And they said, "You did this?" And I said, "Yeah, I did it." They were so enthusiastic about it that they brought in another guy who got this first show, that book that you have, Primordial Images of a Modern Mystic. Yes, that book. This one. And he came over here, and I was out. They gave me a big show. They showed 75 works. They published that book. So I kind of started at the top. Rather than going into a gallery and showing one piece, we had a whole museum show. And I don't take credit for any of that, by the way. I think Karen set this up because the timing was right. There's I think in Herman Hesse, one of his books, it says, "I can pray, I can fast, and I can wait." And I learned to do all of those things. I can pray, I can fast, and I can wait. And since I never intended to show it, there was not much ego in actually showing the work, except for the fact that it was now out. And since it's gotten out, it's been shown all over the world. It's gone to Australia, to Greece, to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Indianapolis, to universities all over the country, and my own gallery that I have here. But I don't really sell this work. I have sold pieces, but that's not my intent to sell the work. The work is my journal, whether it's sculpture or paintings or drawings. It's still my experiences. So till I'm done with them, I'm not really interested in parting with them. And yet, unless somebody comes and Caron says, this person should have this piece, and I'll give it to them or sell it to them or whatever they want to do. Because it's like the energy calls people to come here. They come, and when they come, they leave, and they want to take something with them. And so it's not mine to give. It really belongs to Caron, to the universe. So I just give them the paintings or the art or whatever, and they take it with them. I have a lady that comes from Bali all the time. And she was the first one to ever buy any works. And she'd say, how much do you want for this? And I'd say, oh, I don't know, $50. She'd go, no, I'll give you $2,000 for that. Okay. I mean, I really didn't need the money, so it wasn't a money issue. What's really kind of special about the experience of coming out was the fact that I've never gotten a bad review by anyone. In the Museum of Contemporary Art, I did a show there with Caron's Pantheon, which is 13 sculptures of Caron's allies that represent various forms of consciousness. In fact, that book is this book here. If you can see it or not, but they're life-size sculptures, and they also have music with them. Anyway, a Chicago critic, which I never thought would get this, got it. He wrote a wonderful review. It's online. You can see it. It's on my website. And he understood exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at archetypal feminine energy from time eternal. And I have been accused of being a feminist artist, which is kind of funny. But I think that's because my connection with the goddess is unique to my experience and special to my experience. I've always dealt with Caron. There's a male figure, a female figure, or an it figure. In other words, just somethomorphous figure. Most of the time, she comes to me in a female form. And of course, that's an anima. That's classic Jungian thinking. But never mind Jung, the fact is that it's a relationship. Caron and I have an intimate relationship. And there's nothing that I have done or will do or could have done that Caron has not seen or participated in. And the beauty of not having any judgment on anything that I have done or experienced or participated in is refreshing, considering that I come from a culture that's very judgmental, a religion that is very judgmental, sending me to hell and everything else. I'm not running short on time, but there's one experience that I had that really changed my life. I was taken down to this boat, and Caron was not with me. But I had this vision, I was on the mountain, and I was taken to this boat. I got in the boat, and I sailed down this river, and there were all these harpies all over the place, and they were trying to tear at me, but they couldn't. For some reason, they were resisting. And I arrived at this dock. I'm paraphrasing this. It's all in my book, but I had to cut this short. I arrived at this dock, and I got out, and I went to this huge door. It was probably 300 feet high and made out of bronze, and it opened. And when I went inside, there were tens of thousands of people in revelry over anticipation of this creature that was going to come, and they were going to worship. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing, what I was there for, or anything else. It was pretty intimidating, and I was very intimidated. And because I didn't have Caron with me, I was by myself. And so all of a sudden, this incredible creature comes. He must have been 30 feet high. He was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I mean, he glowed. He was just so charismatic, so powerful, so overwhelming. And he came right to me. Here I am standing in the middle of this big amphitheater with all these thousands of people, of beings. We couldn't see what they were. And here was this creature. And asked me right off, what are you doing here? I said, well, your spirit guide brought me here. And I could tell immediately that he was pure evil incarnate. And he said to me, you don't belong here. This is not a place for you. You need to leave. And he said it with such love and affection that I thought, wait a minute, this isn't the evil that I was told about. I mean, maybe I'm using the wrong word. Maybe I'm experiencing things that are not evil. Anyway, so I got into my head where I always get. He said, get out of your head and come with me. And he walked me back to the boat. And he said, I want you to leave here and never come back. And I certainly agreed to do that. So I got in the boat, and when I woke up, it was raining, and I was in this cave on the mountain. And what I got out of that vision was that all those things that I had been told when I was a child, that I was evil and demon-possessed, have now been officially refuted by this incredibly powerful demon. And don't get me wrong, I do not believe in heaven or hell. There is no heaven, there is no hell in my belief system. That's just my opinion. There is only truth. The truth is truth is outside of duality. There cannot be a dualism in truth. There cannot be right or wrong, up or down, right or, left, right. There can't be anything that's dualistic, because once you get past those dualisms, you're in a different space. And that space is unity. And whereas many religions teach, especially Hinduism and Buddhism, you're just one with the self, and there's no other. So consequently, there's just unity inside of unity. There's no. I know that one of the Tai Chis is all white. There's no black, no white, because the unity is there. It could be all black as far as that goes. And that's when I realized that, the mythology of good and evil and all that, all those dualisms wiped out. And I was just living in the time of truth, the time of now. Because now is all there is anyway. There's no past, there's no future, there's only now. And now is the way into everything. If you can be now and you can be present in now, then you're there. You've done the job. You've finished the race. You've taken the step that needs to be done. Now, the difficulty, of course, is remaining in that state. And, but again, that now is just now. I mean, it's always now. And the physics of now is very interesting, too. I mean, the physicists are beginning to sound more like mystics than mystics do. And I think we're just about out of time, but all I can say is that once I learned that now was forever, I never worried about life or death or principalities or things present or things past. It made no difference anymore, because everything was present time. Everything was now, and now is forever. So this conversation that we're having now, we'll have this conversation forever. There'll never be a time we do not have this conversation. There'll never be a time that I didn't read your book for the first time. There'll never be a time that I didn't meet you for the first time. There'll never be a time that I didn't do my art. So I'm always doing my art. I'm always doing my music, and I'm always going to the mountain for the first time and meeting Caron for the first time. I mean, it's wonderful to understand that all those things are going on at all times, constantly, and forever. So that's kind of, in our nutshell, that's kind of where I come and where I am now. I mean, I'm 71 now, and the time here is what it is, and I don't pay much attention to it. I just listen to my energy and record of what is next, and live in the present, live in the now. And,
all I can say is, Myron, that was the most fascinating hour.
I think I've lost your voice here.
That's right. Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Oh, right. Okay.
Oh, I can
Hello, I'm here.
You, but it's very low.
Oh, okay. What I was going to be saying is that was one of the most fascinating hours I've ever spent, because I was just, all my questions that I wanted to ask you, you already answered in the discussion. There was only one or two things that really stuck out at me. Was when you were talking about Jung, I was reminded of his concept of Philemon, his idea of his own daemon and his own tutelary spirit that actually guided him. I was also reminded of when you were talking about your temporal lobe epilepsy as being a gift, I was very much reminded of what Dostoevsky said when he was asked about his seizures, and he said that he would give up his whole life for that moment of ecstasy, literally ecstasis outside of himself, when he actually experiences the aura state before he went into a full-blown grand mal seizure. But effectively, what I'd like to just finish off with now is we have about 2 or 3 more minutes. What I'd like you to do is to explain a little bit about how people can check your work and everything else, what your website is, the various things that they can know about you, and also just very quickly about your work with Clive Barker as well. And just a very quick question from myself. Am I right in saying that Clive Barker is an epileptic as well? Because I had read that somewhere.
As far as Barker being epileptic, I'm not sure of that. We didn't discuss it when we worked together on that show, Two Madmen. So I'm not. I wouldn't want to put him in any kind of category. He certainly has a incredible mind, that's for sure, and he has a vivid imagination. But if you look at my work and his work, they're very different.
Yeah.
When we did that show together, you could tell, without even looking at the titles, you could tell that this art over here is not like this art. It's not push on it in that sense. Creative artist and a writer, and he illustrates all his own books, so that's really he does a lot of that. By the way, everything about me, finding out about me, I have a website, MyronDyal.com. If you Google my name, the website comes up. You can't do it from an iPhone, you can only do it from your computer. It's www.myrondyal.com. And I'm on Facebook, of course, so you can join me on Facebook. I post a vision a day on Facebook almost every day. And right now I'm looking at 64 Peake cards. I'm doing a whole series on the Peake cards, so I'm posting some of them. I'll be selling backup cards this year, something like that.
I think
I want to do of my own art with
I just lost Myron. Just like this morning saying to finish off is that you can actually pick up Myron's work on www.myrondyal.com. The one L Dial as well as Myron M-Y-R-O-S, myrondyal.com. Myron is also extremely active on Facebook as well. If you go onto my Facebook wall, you will find a link somewhere on when we put this up. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very much for. And all I can say is, from wherever he's actually now gone back into the ether, is to thank him so much for an absolutely enthralling discussion. And again, I feel we just scratched the surface. He's just back. Just hold on.